What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Heavyweight Politics. My name, of course, is James. If you are coming in from one of our other channels, thank you so much for joining. You know, for the most part in the past, for some of the other channels that I've been on, I've always said I don't talk politics on there. Or I said I try my best not to talk politics on there. But I want to have a way to kind of talk a bit more about some of the issues that a lot of us kind of like talking about behind the scenes of some of the other channels I work with. And I figured this might be the best way to do it. So this might come across as a bit rambling at times. I'm still trying to work through what's the best format for doing these kind of videos. I think for right now, you know, pull up a story, talk a little bit about it, you know, basic style for at the moment, and kind of go from there, see how things kind of develop. You know, going to try to be doing 2 to 3 videos a week. We'll see how we go. But for today, we got ourselves an interesting one that still kind of harkens back to some of the, you know, Twitch streams and stuff I've been on with friends where we talked a little bit about this, but now it's right here in the news. And that is Illinois lawmaker seeks ban of Grand Theft Auto game following the rise in carjackings. Now, a lot of us have been saying for a long time at this point that the Democrats today are like the puritanical Christians of like the late 90s and early 2000s, right? So, you know, I'm a 90s kid. I think anyone else out there who's a 90s kid or even 80s kid probably remembers back in the day where all the Christians were saying, oh, can't watch Harry Potter, it's full of wizardry and all that stuff, or Dungeons and Dragons, ooh, scary, gonna convert people away from Christianity and turn them all to Satanist or some other crap like that. The Democrats have turned to that now, right? You know, originally the Christians were saying, well, you can't have X, Y, and Z, right? Yet what are Democrats doing today? Well, we can't have certain type of portrayal of, you know, women in games anymore. We can't have certain, you know, movies out anymore. We have to ban those movies. We have to do these book burnings nonstop like we're doing now with Dr. Seuss. And what do you know, now they're moving their way back to gaming, which is kind of funny since a lot of the cultural war, of course, started with something like Gamergate. But again, they're going right back to this idea of how's the best way to control the population? Oh, that's right. Ban stuff. Ban stuff. Take away their ability to access it, because that's going to be what ends up stopping it at the end of the day, right? So, an Illinois state lawmaker wants to ban the sale of video games, including Grand Theft Auto, as carjackings have increased in the state. Now, this is Illinois, right? So anyone who's been to Illinois, especially Chicago, will know it's not really the safest of areas, right? And for years, they've been trying to scapegoat all sorts of different reasons as to why it's not safe. Of course, they talk about guns all the time, even though it's almost impossible to get a gun in Chicago. It's almost impossible to walk around with a gun in Chicago. Yet they'll try to ban guns. They'll still blame Republicans, even though, what, a Republican hasn't been a mayor there for over 50 years. I think it's over 80 now, to be perfectly honest. Could be even longer. They're always trying to find a scapegoat for their bad policies, and of course now they're looking towards video games to explain away all the carjackings that have been happening in the state. Now here's the funny thing, in Chicago, when I was last in Chicago, I had someone tell me that we had to stay about 2 car lengths behind certain people in certain areas, because if you got too close, they would then use that to kind of box you in and carjack you, right? So we were driving through Chicago, and every single time they're like, no, you gotta stop back here. Don't want to get too close to them. Don't want to get too close to them. This is an issue that's been in Chicago for a long time, and it just is now it's, you know, starting to hit the fan to a point where they're having to make some response on it, and the response is of course going to be, oh, video games, that's going to be it, right? You know, kids are being indoctrinated by video games just like how they're being indoctrinated by YouTube down the right-wing rabbit hole, apparently. So Representative Marcus Evans Jr., a Democrat, of course, has introduced a bill that would amend a pre-existing law banning certain video games from being sold to minors. His amendment would ban the sale of games with subject matter including motor vehicle theft with a driver or passenger present. With a driver or passenger present. So if it doesn't have a driver there, it's perfectly fine, right? You know, you can carjack someone if there's no driver there. That's not a problem. According to Chicago Sun-Times, the amendment has yet to be voted on. So, again, it's obvious what the real situation is, right? The reality is there's a bunch of kids living in an area with nothing else to do. And as they say, of course, idle hands are the devil's plaything, right? It's always been true throughout all of time. It's why it's such a great quote. These kids have nothing left to do. Right now, especially with COVID lockdowns, what else is there to do? You can't really go even out to even basic clubs anymore, right? You can't even really do a lot of the stuff that a lot of people would do in a city. As terrible as I think most of that stuff is, to be honest, though I definitely have had my fair share of it back when I was a bit younger. When people aren't able to really get out there and do the things that they normally enjoy doing, they always turn to other things, right? Crime always increases during situations like these. It's in every society. It's always been the case. When people have less to do, crime increases all the time, especially among the youth. Because let's face it, when we're all young, we think we're invincible and we just want to go on and take on the world, screw everyone else, right? And that's a little bit of all of us. Just other, some of us had different outlets to express that motivation. For me, it was mostly doing things like boxing, and for others, if you get tied up in the wrong groups, can be stuff like crime, and it's really a sad thing to see. There has been renewed debates around the ban after carjackings among young people have recently gone up. The bill would prohibit the sale of some of these games that promotes the activities that we are suffering from in our communities, Evans said, according to the Chicago Sun-Times. A 16-year-old was arrested and charged with carjacking on Monday. Days ago, there was a 15-year-old arrested and charged with carjacking as well. Jesus, Young's 15 years old. A former police officer was also carjacked in the past week. They're going after the police officers too, wow. The young perpetrators were found, but the officers said these guys feel like they are going right back out, especially since they are juveniles. And that is something to be said about our current justice system. Now, don't get me wrong, our justice system sucks. I mean, and to be honest, in places like Chicago and New York, our cops kind of suck there too. And I'm sure there's a lot of good ones out there. I'm sure, if anyone was watching, I doubt you are, but if anyone was watching, there are a few good ones out there in those places. But I visited a place like Chicago. I was just in New York City for a full month. Yeah, the cops there are kind of assholes, to be perfectly honest. I get it, all right? I get why people wouldn't like the cops in big cities. Of course, all the problems with cops typically take place again in Democrat-controlled cities. What do you know? We need criminal justice reform. We need prison reform. We need some reform when it comes to policing. Preferably getting rid of stuff like public sector unions would be a good start. But let's get back to these young people, right? We just saw that there was a 15-year-old or two 15-year-olds arrested and charged with the carjacking as well. At 15 years old, people are already starting to pick this stuff up. And of course, I think anyone who's been in a city, that's not too surprising. You see it all the time, whether it be, any form of gang crime whatsoever. Young people are typically heavily involved because it's the only bit of culture they kind of have to attach themselves to in a lot of these areas, right? Let's face it, there's not much to do in cities. People want to talk about how great cities are. I'm telling you, they suck, all right? I can't stand cities. I've been in cities for quite a while. I hate cities. It's why me and my wife are no longer in a city. And we weren't even the big one to start with, but we are outside of a city right now. Cities suck. There's nothing much to do, especially when you're young. I mean, think about it. And sure, when you turn 21, you can go to clubs, you can go to bars, you can start enjoying the nightlife and that kind of stuff. But what do you do in a city when you're young, right? You don't really have much options. Not to mention what is going on in these people's lives. What's going on in a lot of inner city kids' lives. A lot of them, let's face it, don't know their dad. That's a whole nother issue, right? A lot of them are just being indoctrinated into schools where, to be honest, they're just kind of crappy schools, right? You look at any inner city school, most people graduate, they don't know any of our founding fathers, they don't know any bit of philosophy or history or anything like that. So of course, they're going to turn to a group of people that take some in, and in their way, they can learn from. I use quotation marks because what they're learning, of course, is terrible. They're learning things like crime and gang activity. They're not learning any real lessons of responsibility and how to make the world a better place. That is what we're lacking right now. Of course, the school systems aren't doing their job, but more importantly, the parents at home aren't doing their job. I guarantee you these two 15-year-olds don't have a dad. Guarantee you they don't have a dad, because I've seen it constantly when I've gone to cities that these kids typically do not have a father. They're typically being raised in single mother households. Obviously, the mom is doing the best she can in many circumstances, trying to do what she can to supply them with what they need, as well as to, of course, raise them. But you need both people in the house. You gotta have both people in the house. And some people turn out all right, obviously. I hate to say it, that's the exception. It's not the rule. All studies show this, that you need to have two parents in the house. But the Democrats have never been about responsibility, have they? I mean, let's face it, these cities have never talked about responsibility even once. They always talk about, well, what can we ban? What can we stop? Of course, it goes from guns. They talk, let's demonize this group. Let's talk bad about Republicans. Say, of course, opening up a more free society. Well, that won't work. We just got to keep banning and cracking down on stuff. And that's what's being shown right now with games like Grand Theft Auto here in the story, where instead of going and looking at, well, okay, what's going on in these kids' lives that are actually pushing them to a life of crime, we're instead going, well, they were carjacking people, so let's just ban Grand Theft Auto because we know they were playing it. Because let's face it, a lot of us play Grand Theft Auto. I got it on my computer right over here, right? It's something that everyone can play, something that a lot of us play, and so they're just going to use that as their scapegoat this time, because no one wants to talk about the real issues. No one wants to talk about the fact that these kids probably don't have parents, that the school system they're in sucks, that they have no sense of community around them other than crime. These are the issues that these kids are struggling with in most cases, and the issues that no one wants to deal with. But we'll see what happens to this bill. It's been a little bit since they talked about it, so maybe we'll get an update here soon on if they actually pass it or not. But thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please like, subscribe, comment below as to what video you'll like to see next, or what type of topic, maybe some news story, anything sent to me. Love looking at different stuff, so please comment below. Let me know what you're interested in, and hopefully, I'll be seeing you again in our next video. Peace.